And let's start with a blessing for our study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And for those of you who are just joining us now, the midah of the day, if you look on Facebook, is hit lamdut, openness to learning. So you are the exemplars of this midah here today. We are in the book of Leviticus, chapter 26, the penultimate chapter of Leviticus in the Parsha of Bechukotai, which happens to have been the Parsha just last week. And I believe that we finished off last week with verse 6, and we read Pliskin's commentary on that verse. The verse was promising as one of the many blessings that are promised for fulfillment of the mitzvot, peace and security. And Pliskin made the point that one of the foundations of peace and security is a lack of envy, being able to feel joy in other people's accomplishments and achievements and good fortune, and that if we could get to that point, then we would be able to have a true sense of peace. So any further reflections on that before we continue with the text in verse 7? No, good. Okay, so moving forward. So remember, the first blessing had to do with having enough food, because that is a fundamental need. We talked about the hierarchy of needs, and hopefully you saw those couple of things I sent you by email that had to do with all of the different universal human needs. Very interesting document. So food is number one. And number two is peace and security. And we talked also about freedom from the fear of attack by wild animals, which is something most of us don't contend with anymore. Although if you saw in today's, this morning's paper, there was a hiker who was bitten by a rattlesnake and had to be evacuated off. I forget if it was Camelback or which mountain. But, so I guess freedom from fear of wild beasts is still a little bit relevant. So, and we also talked about this idea of vicious beasts being interpreted metaphorically as the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Hara of other people, as kind of the animal instinct within us, one might say. Or, I wonder if our psychologists among us might say the id is the id, the wild beast within us. So now we're expanding our definition of security in verse 7. You shall give chase to your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. 5 of you shall give chase to 100. So that's pretty good sense of military might. 5 to 100, and to still be able to win the battle when you're that outnumbered. And 100 of you shall give chase to 10,000. Your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. I'm not sure why the repetition of this reference to falling by the sword, but there you have it.
But the numbers are exponentially larger.
Yes. But the same idea.
The same outcome.
It will take a very small number of you to vanquish a very large number of them. And boy, if you think about wars in the state of Israel in our generation, that has very much been the case, from the War of Independence to 67 to the Yom Kippur War. If you look how probably that last number, Owen, 100 to 10,000 might actually reflect the odds that Israel faces in its strategic environment.
Rabbi, I was looking at the repetition of the word sword. Is it actually sword in the Hebrew?
Yes.
So that's, to me, saying this isn't enough for you to vanquish and defeat them. You need to kill them by repeating it. Yeah, by repeating
Yes,
it.
and fall also it implies not being taken captive or surrendering. Fall by the sword is. And we saw that in Deuteronomy. Remember in Deuteronomy, it was, go into the land and kill the inhabitants. Look how much trouble we got into when we defied that order to kill the Amalekites. There was Rahmanis granted to the Amalekites, and then they went on to birth Haman, exemplar of all of the enemies of Israel. So, yeah, if you, it's a pretty harsh standard.
There's a book I think written in 2018 called Rise and Kill First, and this is the history of Israel's targeted assassination program.
Oh, wow.
So all that happens with the authorization of the Israeli prime minister always. But Israel takes the stand that it has the right to kill preemptively as a proportional response.
So that title, interestingly, Lisa, is based on the Talmudic verse that said, if someone is pursuing you with the intent to kill, rise up earlier and kill them first.
Is that also in Torah?
No, it's Talmudic.
It's not in Torah. Okay. But, I think it's interesting that, Israel sees that as a proportional response rather than all out war. You just target, you have particular targets and you do that.
We've been doing that with drones in the Middle East for many years.
Yeah.
Listen, we've been doing it since David killed Goliath.
Yeah, there you go. A targeted assassination.
Yeah, exactly.
This 5 to 100 or 100 to 10, that's far greater than David against Goliath. That's a huge difference. One giant versus one man versus this. Sounds bizarre that it's possible to do that.
Well, remember, Goliath was a giant. So
So he was the equivalent of more than one.
He weighed
More than one, but not
he
100.
weighed 20 times what David weighed.
Pound.
It's
a
pound
giant
to pound.
versus, you're talking proportionally, it's a little larger than that.
When we studied this over this David portion over the summer, we did a lot of research and sort of concluded among ourselves that the giant was, I can't remember the name of it, but it's that birth defect that produces unlimited growth.
Oh, yeah. Pituitary giant.
Marfan.
Yes.
And that's probably what afflicted him. And he wasn't, unfortunately, super fast mentally as a result of the...
I just want to be sensitive. We have certain congregants who suffer from Marfan.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. I just want to be sensitive.
Right. So not only was his size an impediment, but he was also weighted down with armor. So he didn't have that agility.
He was slow, right.
Of movement.
Right.
Good. So
I also think of, when I think about this, they fall by the sword. I think of, is it Judith and Holofernes? She killed him with the sword.
Yeah, there you go. Good one. Everybody know that story from the Maccabean era. She seduced the enemy general and then cut off his head.
Oh, right.
Slipped my mind. That one slipped my mind.
It's the subject of many paintings.
We're a pretty
Oh, yeah.
religion.
How is that depicted?
What?
In the painting, how is
Well,
that?
evicted. I thought you said I almost got evicted.
No, Barry's the one who's suffering from eviction.
Yeah. Suffering from eviction.
You see Judith holding up
Yeah,
Halifax
yeah,
Yeah.
decapitated head.
Yeah, you can have some fun. As I said, Heat Lum Dude is the midah of the day. So there's a good topic for you this afternoon, Terry. You can look at
Okay. I'll
And
look-
Barry, you're not homeless.
You can watch Game of Thrones if you really watch those heads fly.
Oh,
Well, I don't consider myself homeless. I haven't had to sleep in my car yet, okay?
You never will. I can always blow up a mattress in another room. We're full half the week, but
I,
you'll never
thank you,
be
Terry.
home.
I appreciate the offer.
there you go. All
You're
right, so we
welcome
have
to be
food
home.
security, we have physical security. Moving on to verse 9. I will look with favor upon you and make you fertile and multiply you, and I will maintain my covenant with you. So be fertile and multiply. Peru, remember that was like the first mitzvah that was given to Adam and Eve, or when human beings were created. The mandate was Pru urevu umilua ta'aretz. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And it's the exact same verbs here. Hifreti v'hir beti, the same root, to be fruitful and multiply. And if you look throughout the early books of the Torah, Genesis in particular, at the struggles with infertility, you really understand the depth and power of that particular blessing, to be fruitful and multiply. And it's interesting that it's two different ideas. Again, in the contemporary world, we pretty much have an expectation that people will get pregnant and give birth, and that child will grow to adulthood. And I think there is still a miscarriage rate of about 25%. So it's very, very jarring. But certainly once children are born, we expect that they will grow to adulthood, which is something that in previous generations, and certainly in the ancient world, was not at all to be taken for granted. You might be fruitful, but you might not yet multiply because there was such a strong rate of infant mortality. So
And maternal mortality.
yes,
And what?
Maternal.
maternal. So both the mothers and the children had a
Oh,
high rate of
maternal.
death
I
in
thought you
childbirth,
said eternal.
which of course was what happened to Rachel. Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin. So not to be taken for granted, that to be fertile and multiply, we need both of those blessings, and maintain my covenant with you. So something really completely different. There will be many of you, and you will continue to enjoy this special favor, this special relationship with God. So a beautiful picture of what life is going to look like if you observe the mitzvot. You'll have lots to eat. You'll live in peace. There will be many of you. You'll be able to vanquish any enemies. Continuing in verse 10, you will eat old grain long stored, and you shall have to clear out the old to make room for the new. So again, just an image of incredible abundance. You'll have so much food that you'll have nowhere to put it.
Yeah, Rabbi, do you
Yeah.
think that the part about you shall eat old grain long stored, do you think that's where the Mormons got the idea about they have large amounts of food stored in their homes?
Food storage, I don't know what the source of that teaching
Could
is.
that be the meaning of this? To store food in your home in case of, yeah, I wouldn't expect to know. I
Well,
asked,
sure, in an agricultural
Yeah.
community, that the expectation is you're going to have lots of stores of food, but with where we're so dependent on agriculture and on the rain and you're storing as much food as possible. But the flip side of it is the concern about famine and crop failure and not having enough food. So that's an assurance that you'll be blessed with abundance. Barry K.
This to me was one of the first of the what I like to refer to as the CPA concepts in Leviticus. It's FIFO inventory. We want first in, first out. Always use the oldest before the newest. I know we get more of these kind of concepts in chapter 27, of course, but I'll save my comments.
Yeah, Marcy.
When I read that, my first thought was not that it's long, it's that it's stored, but that it's old, that it doesn't go bad.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it reminds me of the oil situation where they had so much oil, they were paying people to take the oil off their hands because nobody's using oil. That was in the news a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But I think
They
it's
had
also,
huge abundance of oil and no place to put it.
yeah, also a cautionary to not
That's
waste.
clearing out the old and making new room for the new.
And also don't waste the old food.
Yeah, Merle.
It makes me think of what we do now. When we go to the grocery store, we look at expiration dates on products.
Yeah, there you go.
And it's like I was cleaning out the pantry yesterday, and you move the more current expiration dates to the front and put the older ones in the back so you don't waste whatever the product is.
You'll have to clear out the old to make room for the new.
Felix's arm is tired.
Oh, okay, Felix.
Yeah, picking up on Marcy, really, the implication for me here is that God will protect the grain from spoilage.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we store food for a long time, we know it's vulnerable to spoilage, to being eaten by animals, to whatever the environment might infest it with. So God is like promising us that don't worry, it will be preserved well for you, and you'll be able to eat it and eat it first. You won't get sick. You won't get sick from it.
The New York Times had something in their food section several weeks ago about the expiration dates. They said you can't go by the expiration dates because not everything will spoil. It may be optimum time for them, and they went through a whole list of things that you could use. And don't worry about it, particularly in this time when people are short of food. Don't worry about using the older stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously not a spoiled milk, but
Our dietitian wants to weigh in. Willa.
oh, well, no, it has nothing to do with being a dietitian. But I see where in 10, I see where you have to take a certain amount of responsibility also.
Yes.
You have to clear out the old to make room for the new. So, there's you shall eat the old grain stored, but you've got to take responsibility to keep the flow.
Yeah, good point. It doesn't happen by magic.
Right.
You have
No
to you have to put in a little effort. Terry?
Sour milk makes very good pancakes.
All right.
Plus, it seems to me that if we think about this, also the grain is metaphorical. If we think about it as food for the spirit too, that works both with what both of you folks were saying. In terms of that, God is going to preserve it, right? So it doesn't spoil for us, and that it's always a source of nourishment. But that also it's our responsibility to think about the types of spiritual nourishment that we take in and what we process and what we keep and what we discard.
That's beautiful.
It's beautiful, and it's kind of challenging because it kind of if we look at the advice and the wisdom and the things in terms of when we learn them as aging.
Yeah.
As there's I'm not quite clear on how to express it yet, but there's an idea forming in there that that the old before the new, that you should maybe when you get new insights, you should still kind of run them past the old insights.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, that was a very challenging little drip drop there, Mr. Kittredge.
And I think maybe there's an implication there for ourselves as we age. The only caveat is that we should balance the old with the new, that the older we get, the more we need to eat newer food rather than older food.
Right. So that brings us back to being open to learning. And it is one of the criticisms of older people is that there can be a temptation to shut down the mind and to just be comfortable living with wherever we are in our learning and not being open to the new grain.
Like reminiscing.
But I have to say something in defense of older people in that respect. I think that there was a book a number of years ago about how things are changing more rapidly recently than they were 20 years ago and 20 years before that there's such a rapid change in everything that sometimes if you haven't grown up with it, it's hard. Now, I try to keep open to all the new stuff, but it's harder, I think, if you haven't grown up with it.
We all learn Zoom.
Yeah. That's it. And we're all learning because one of the silver line, the only decent thing I've found about the pandemic is I've become more technologically aware.
So far, I'm drawing the line at Instagram.
The more we're open to
I have an Instagram account. I don't get it. I'm still struggling. James, you're laughing. You're probably the youngest person here. Can you explain to me the value and purpose of Instagram?
I can't explain it at all. I got a sister who takes pictures of her food. Like,
before you get old.
I don't know why you're showing me your breakfast here. None of it makes sense to me.
As long as she's staying on the oral level, you're safe.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
No, people post all kinds of pictures on it. It's you know, but what I wanted to say a little bit there was that in terms of Willa, the more we're open to learning, even though it's hard or gets harder, the more we're keeping ourselves youthful, even though chronologically we're aging.
I'm rethinking my original thought. So there's also the aspect of having to clean out the old to make make room for the new. So we don't keep recycling. We don't keep that down there and as a foundation and say it can never go away. Yeah. And there is our openness to learning, Rabbi. There's our mandate is to make room for the new wheat.
Yeah. Yeah, very nice.
That makes sense.
Very nice.
You know, what's very beautiful about this idea of ongoing learning, to me, is that the tradition actually addresses dementia. That even a person who cannot retain what they learn is still obligated to continue to learn. That just because you have lost the capacity to retain the new knowledge doesn't mean that you, what does Rabbi Tarfon say? It's not your obligation to complete the task, but neither are you free to desist from it.
Right.
And Rabbi, can we say you're obligated to engage with learning?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's the blessing we say before our study? La'asok b'divrei Torah. That's a fair translation, to engage with the study of Torah.
Yeah.
I thought it was to soak in it, but anyway.
I like that.
I'm going to add the word coping here, because that is another form of learning, is learning how to cope. Is it adapting, I guess is the word. That we've all had to adapt to this situation. We've adapted all our lives, whether we know it or not. A new person comes into your life, you get married, you find a partner, you bring a child into the house one way or the other. All of those things require learning, even if you don't have to open a book to do it, you still have to learn. A person who becomes homeless has to learn how to survive on the street. There's a million ways to apply that aspect to this. It's interesting, though, that this is a discussion of food originally and where we are right now.
Yes.
What
Well,
else?
I learned more about brain surgery than I ever wanted to. You have to do what comes your way. Like you said about adapting and learning. I've discovered as I get older, though, sometimes I will now choose what I want to learn.
Correct.
As opposed to saying I want to learn it all, which is what I did when I was like younger. And then sometimes that got me in trouble because it was too much. But I find myself lately deciding what I do and don't want to spend my time learning.
Well, I think also
Definitely.
all this discussion, this is almost like food for thought.
Yeah.
There you go. I like that.
I do too.
All right, good. Let's move on to verse 11.
What
I will.
page are we on?
We're on chapter Leviticus 26, verse 11. So I can't give you a page number. I don't know what book you're looking at. Can you find it, Sarah Lee?
No, I don't have it with me, so.
You
Well,
don't
in my
have
book,
a, you don't have a
in
copy of the
5-7
Torah?
in my book, 957, if that helps anybody.
Well, no, everybody has a different.
Has a different book. Well, they might have the same book that I do.
Yeah.
The
Sarah Lee, you don't have a copy
Study
of the
Bible is
Torah, the
274.
an English version of the Torah in your house?
Yes, I do. I have several.
You have a Bible? We'll just go get any Bible that you have.
Yeah. Mhm.
There you go.
Be better.
So, I will establish my abode in your midst, and I will not spurn you. So again, this idea of the ongoing nature of the covenant. I'm going to be with you. The establish, what's translated here, I will establish my abode. V'natati mishkani b'tochechem. Mishkan literally is the tabernacle, the traveling sanctuary in the wilderness. That's the Mishkan. I will establish my presence, my place with it in your midst. And remember, when the mitzvah was given to build the tabernacle, it was surprising to see that the Torah says, let them build me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Because you might have expected, let them build me a sanctuary that I may dwell in it. So an important distinction, that the Spirit of God dwells among them within the community. If Becca was here, I know she would have something to say about that. That the Spirit of God, the connection with God, is not confined just to that one place, even though we may have that physical place. And actually, I'm thinking, what a beautiful and important reminder right here now, when we can't access the physical building of our temple, and
Right.
yet we might imagine that there is still a godly spirit that infuses the community that we are able to sustain even without access to that physical building. So
Well, among them,
yes,
that's the covenant. I will dwell amongst the people who are part of the covenant.
right.
And
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead, Felix.
And what comes to my mind is the 23rd Psalm, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord. The abode is the house of the Lord forever. So that the spiritual figurative sense of the house is to be with God wherever you are.
Yes.
And then you will be living in that house.
Yeah, same thing in Psalm 27, which is the psalm for Elul and the high holiday season. One thing I ask, this do I desire, that I may dwell in God's house forever. It doesn't mean that you live at shul. It means that you have the sense that you are dwelling in God's house wherever you are. Sarah Lee, so you got the Bible there?
I have this here. I've got the Holy Scriptures that I'm going.
Perfect. That's perfect. So can you find the book of Leviticus?
Yep, I've got Leviticus here.
And look at chapter 26.
26, I've got, okay, I'm on 26. I got it.
Perfect. And if you find verse 11, that's what we're talking about. Read us what it says in 26:11 in your translation there.
26:11. Okay. 20. It's such small print. This is, oh, really? 26.
I believed you.
Put your glasses on.
Or magnifying glass.
Yeah.
26.
Do you find it? Chapter 26, verse 11. What does it say?
26. I've got 26, verse 11. And it goes back. The pages are so thin here also. Let me see. 26, 11, 11, 11, 11, 11, 11. Yeah. And if it be any unclean beast of which they...
No, you're not in the right chapter.
26. Okay.
Yeah, Leviticus. Leviticus 26:11 is what you're looking for. All right, so keep looking. Let us know when you think you found it.
Okay.
I'm going to make sure you can follow along. And maybe after today's session, you can go comb your bookshelves and see what other...
I've got 3 of these at different sizes. Let me see, 11 here, 26:11. And I will set my tabernacle among you, and my soul shall not abhor you.
Beautiful. Oh, what a lovely... All right, so that's where we are.
Okay,
So
great.
you could put a bookmark in there after today, and that's where we're going to pick up in the coming weeks. So I love that poetic translation. My soul will not abhor you. Yeah, lo tigal nafshi etchem. What a beautiful image of God having a soul.
True.
Yeah.
You know, that's not something we often think about. Although it does imply if God has a soul, does God also have a body? You know, we make a strong point that God is not physical. And yet, so I would have thought that God was kind of pure soul. But if God is speaking about my soul, that it implies that somehow God's soul is separate from God. So I'm not quite sure how to understand that. But anyway, I'm...
Well, Rabbi, we can consider ourselves the body of God, no? God created us
in his image.
In his image. So we are the body, as close to a body as I think we can think.
Yeah, typically, I don't know, I'm reluctant to interpret being in the image of God in a physical sense. I've always understood personally the idea of being in the image of God as emulating God's attributes. So the 13 attributes of God, as God says, Adonai, Adonai, El Rahum V'Chanun, I am compassionate and gracious, Erech Apayim, Barav Chesed, slow to anger, full of chesed, that's what it means to be in the image of God, not that there's some physical correlation.
Well, is it also saying to the effect that no matter who or what you are, God still loves you?
Yeah, that's the next verse. Very good. The next verse. I will be ever present in your midst. I will be your God, and you shall be my people. So yes, very much that idea of the eternality of the covenant. And, this chapter is going to turn very, very quickly here to the negative consequences of disobeying. Right now, remember, we're in this beautiful, idyllic, here are all the blessings that are going to come to you from obedience, but we're going to have probably 3 times as much of curses of what happens if you disobey. And yet, as you're pointing out, Sarah Lee, the covenant will still be there. The fundamental commitment is eternal. I will be ever present. What does it say? Ani Adonai Elohechem. That's Hitalachti betochachem, v'hayiti lachem lelohim. I will be to you a God, v'atem to you li la'am. We're coming up on the holiday of Shavuot, which celebrates receiving the Torah. And one of the very interesting liturgical forms of the holiday of Shavuot is that the holiday is depicted as a wedding between God and the Jewish people. And there are actually ketubot, so marriage contracts between God and the people that are read at the holiday of Shavuot as part of the traditional celebration of the holiday. So God and the Jewish people are entering into this eternal covenant like a marriage. And this language here is very, very evocative of that. We're making a commitment to be together. Of course, there is such a thing as divorce. And, I think Elie Wiesel talks about that in some of his writing about the Holocaust as almost a moment when God and the Jewish people divorced. There was no longer that sense of, I'm with you, I'm going to be with you. There's nothing that can come between us, nothing that can break us up. But right now, here, it's this moment of great joy and celebration and commitment, this classic statement of the covenant. I'll be your God, you'll be my people. And, it does beg all of those challenging questions about what do we mean when we say that we are the chosen people. This is an idea that has been problematic for the Jewish people throughout our history. There are many fingers pointed at us to say, what makes you think that you have this special relationship with God more so than any other people? It was one of the tenets of Mordechai Kaplan and the Reconstructionist movement was the rejection of this idea of chosenness. In our Torah blessing, what we say when we're called up for an aliyah, Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. You chose us from among all the peoples. So essentially, what a chutzpahdik thing to say, that we're special, we're the favorites. And Mordechai Kaplan said it's racist, undemocratic. He had a whole bunch of calumnies against the idea of chosenness. And in the Reconstructionist prayer book, published in 1945, the original Reconstructionist prayer book, as articulated by Kaplan, he said, he changed that blessing to say, Asher kervanu la'avodato. You've drawn us near to your service. So shifting the whole emphasis of this idea, rather than top down, God choosing us, rather us being drawn close to God and a sense of responsibility that we have, not that we're the special beloved and everybody else is in a different category, but that we see ourselves as drawn close to God and having more responsibility. I'm thinking about, my favorite, the old Hebrew National hot dog commercial with Uncle Sam and the top hat and the disembodied voice. Remember this commercial from our youth, right, Terry? The
We
U.S.
answer
government says
to
we
a
can
higher
put, you know,
authority.
fillers and artificial colorings and flavorings, but you know, we can't. We're kosher. We answer to a higher authority.
That's really great.
So
But
that's
don't we also say that we have been chosen to be a light unto the nations?
absolutely. So,
And hot dog makers to some.
what's that?
And hot dog makers to some.
Yes. Hot dog makers to the wise.
I think I'd rather make hot dogs. This light thing is really hard.
Touche, Terry. I think that's the quotable quote of the day. So yes, Asher Kirvanu Lava. Oh, I know what else I wanted to talk about. James, I see your question. James sent me a private question. I'll have to get back to you later today after my funeral. James was looking for some examples of those ketubot for Shavuot. I imagine that by the time I finish my funeral and my Diane drive-by, you'll have been able to find some online. If you just Google Shavuot and ketubah, and I bet you'll be able to find some examples of that. Or they would be in a traditional prayer book. But I wanted to talk about the Aleinu prayer. So Aleinu is another prayer that Kaplan changed in his prayer book. So the original Aleinu, well, let's talk about Aleinu as we have it. Shalo sam chelkenu kahem v'gor Aleinu kechol hamonam, right?
Yeah.
You all know that line from Aleinu. Shalo sam chelkenu kahem. You have not made our portion like theirs. V'gor Aleinu kechol hamonam, and our fate like everybody else. So pointing again to the uniqueness of this covenant between God and the Jewish people. So that was changed in the Reconstructionist prayer book. How did they say it? It's not coming to me this second, but that line also was anathema in the Reconstructionist movement, and it was changed to reflect this idea of I think they just put Shenatan Lanu Torah Emet v'Chayei Olam Nata B'Torenu, that you gave us a Torah of truth and implanted eternal life within us. But the original Aleinu prayer, which we do not have in our prayer book, but is in the Sephardic literature, and I think when I've been at Beit Tefillah, in the prayer book that they use, they have reverted back to the original liturgical formulation, which was more aggressive and said, Shehem mishtachavim lehevel v'rik. They bow down to vanity and nothingness. And that was removed from the Jewish liturgy by medieval censors who took it rightfully as an anti-Christian polemic. And we were forced to take that out of the liturgy. And so in some traditional communities, they have asserted their right to reinsert that language that, you know, they bow down to emptiness and nothingness. So, this idea of the uniqueness of this relationship between God and the Jewish people is, can be profoundly problematic. And, when we try to talk about the, the universal human, how do we reconcile that with this idea of you shall be my people? That clearly implies that other people in some way are not God's people, or they're God's people in a different way than we are God's people. And it's presumptuous to say the least. I know Christians have the idea that if you don't believe certain beliefs about Jesus and who he was, that you will never get to heaven. And that's why Christians have missionaries who go around the world to want to, just out of a sense of love and kindness, want to make sure that everybody at least has the opportunity to hear about Jesus and make their own decision. Jews have never been missionaries, just the opposite. We've always taken the position that you don't have to be Jewish in order to be saved. And yet this text kind of implies that you do have to be Jewish to have this unique, special relationship with God. So I'm just talking myself into being very challenged by this idea.
What I was taught a long time ago is that this let me say that I've learned later that this is just a little bit of a narcissistic interpretation of forgetting what was step one and then just focusing on step two. Step one was that we were the choosing people, that we chose God. And as a result of choosing God, God then reciprocated to us as we being his people then. It's not so much that God chose us, it's that we chose God, and because of that, we became his people. So we are the choosing people, and we can see that in getting back to food, how picky we are about choosing.
I was just going to say, we use the word choosy.
Choosy, picky.
My mom sent me, one of these funny emails just this morning about 40 Jewish foods ranked in order from worst to best. I totally disagree with the. When I send you the recording of this class, I'll send you that email. I mean, it's kind of interesting to see. So this author just ranked for herself. I think the worst was pickled herring or something, and the best was bagel and cream cheese. And but at the very bottom of her list,
and it's 30
varnishkas, which I love.
Yeah, shab.
That's like Kishka was kind
That
of
would
low
be the
down
top of my
there.
list.
But
Anyways,
my grandmother would make shav and have it in the refrigerator, and I always thought it was swamp scum.
I'll just make myself a note to send that to you later today after I get this recording.
It's the feet thing. It's the feet thing.
So Felix, George Bernard Shaw said that God made man in his own image, and man, being a gentleman, returned the favor.
So of course, Felix, the other thing is that the Midrash says that it's not exactly like we had a free choice. So the Midrash says that when God was marketing the Torah, God went around to different groups of people. And it really, again, it's a Jewish way of putting down other people, I think. So God went to the Edomites and said, would you like my Torah? And they said, well, what's in it? You shall not commit murder. Oh, no, we don't want that. Then God went to the Assyrians and said, well, would you want my Torah? Well, what's in it? Thou shalt not steal. Forget it. We don't want that. So it's not like we were God's first choice. And the Midrash, that same Midrash says that when God offered the people of Israel the Torah, God lifted Mount Sinai over the heads of the assemblage and said, would you like my Torah? And so it was not exactly.
You're actually the last chance I've got to get this Torah thing going.
Right. So, it wasn't exactly a free choice.
No, it was an offer that we couldn't refuse.
Yeah, exactly. But I wanted to go back also to this, how do we view other people, and particularly Christians, Hem nishtachavim lehevel v'reik, that from that original Aleinu prayer, they bow down to emptiness and nothingness. So this is kind of the foundation of the concept of kosher wine. Why does wine have to be kosher? Because the idea was if you used the wine of made by non-Jews, that wine may have been produced to be used in idolatrous worship. If you think of communion, wine and the wafer. So so you could only use wine that was made by Jews for Jews.
A good
And
example.
that's been a big change. Even the conservative movement now says that we no longer consider Christians to be idolaters, and therefore any wine can be considered kosher. But in the Orthodox universe, there still is that concept of kosher wine.
I wonder if the essential antithesis, though, of believing in God is believing in slavery, believing in accepting one's own enslavement to some other. Because I think whether there really was a Mount Sinai up in the air ready to pound, I think what we're really facing was maybe being recaptured by the Egyptians and sent back to Egypt to be slaves again.
Well, so I think, the idea is you're going to serve some master. If it's not God, it's going to be something else. But we
Bob Dylan told us that.
Who did?
Bob Dylan. We all must serve
I was
someone.
thinking of that line too.
Well, what's the line? Remind me.
Do you remember it?
Serve somebody. You're going to serve somebody. You're going to serve somebody.
We must all serve someone.
Yeah, I remember a book I read back in antiquity about communism, and it was, the title of the book was The God That Failed. So good. So I'm looking at the clock. I'm gonna stop. Well, yeah, I think I'm gonna stop the recording, but I'll leave you guys to talk among yourselves. And let's see. So it sounds like I'll see some of you at Smile on Seniors on Tuesday, and Wednesday is Wise Aging, and Thursday is Socialize While Distancing. So lots of opportunity to connect, and I hope I'll see many of you in some of those different venues later this week. And Oseh Shalom B'Mromav Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael V'Yivru. Amen. And let me wish you a Shavua Tov.
Shavua.
Take good care.